I sat at the Christmas dinner table watching my sister Amanda introduce her mysterious CEO boyfriend Marcus to our parents. The mahogany dining room felt suffocating as Amanda's voice dripped with practiced cruelty. She gestured toward me with a smugness I knew all too well and declared, "This is the failure of our family." My parents burst into their familiar harsh laughter while I felt that old sting of humiliation wash over me. Marcus sat silently, his dark eyes observing everything with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. But then something shifted in his expression. A faint smile crossed his face as he spoke with calm precision. "Interesting, because you're fired, and we're done." The laughter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence that seemed to stretch forever. The drive to my childhood home in suburban Columbus, Ohio, always filled me with dread. But this Christmas Eve felt particularly heavy. Snow crunched under my aging Honda Civic's tires as I pulled into the familiar driveway, already steeling myself for another evening as the family disappointment. At 28, I had become accustomed to being the target of every family gathering, but 6 months of unemployment had made me an even easier mark for their collective frustration. My parents' 2-story colonial house glowed with warm light, the same red brick facade that had witnessed countless childhood humiliations. I grabbed the modest gifts from my passenger seat, knowing they would pale in comparison to whatever expensive offerings Amanda would present. The freelance marketing work I had scraped together barely covered my studio apartment rent, let alone lavish Christmas presents. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her perfectly styled gray hair and holiday sweater creating the picture of suburban motherhood. "Duke, honey, you made it," she said, though her tone carried that familiar note of resigned disappointment. "Amanda's already here with her boyfriend. You should see this man, successful executive type, nothing like." She caught herself before finishing the comparison, but we both knew what she meant. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, triggering memories of better times when our family dynamic hadn't been poisoned by constant comparison. Dad emerged from the kitchen, his accountant's precision evident even in his holiday casual wear. "Son," he nodded, shaking my hand with the same professional distance he showed his clients. "Amanda's been telling us about her boyfriend, CEO of some tech company. Very impressive young man." I followed them into the living room where Amanda held court near the decorated Christmas tree. At 31, she had perfected the art of looking successful. Her burgundy dress probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her jewelry caught the light with expensive sparkle. But it was her smile that made my stomach clench, that predatory expression she wore whenever she sensed an opportunity to establish her superiority. "Duke," she called out with false enthusiasm, "come meet Marcus." She gestured toward the man sitting on our parents' leather sofa, and I found myself studying someone who seemed to command attention without effort. Marcus Thompson appeared to be in his mid-30s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly. His dark hair was styled conservatively, and his hazel eyes held an intelligence that made me immediately self-conscious about my department store khakis and clearance rack sweater. "Marcus Thompson," he said, standing to shake my hand with a firm grip. His voice was measured, professional, giving nothing away. "Amanda's told me quite a bit about her family." I could only imagine what version of our family history Amanda had shared. She had always been gifted at crafting narratives that painted her as the victim of my inadequacies, transforming my struggles into evidence of her own superiority. "Nice to meet you," I managed, wondering what executive-level position had brought him into Amanda's orbit. Dinner conversation began with the usual interrogation about my job search. Mom served the turkey while Dad carved with surgical precision, both of them wearing expressions of patient disappointment. "Any luck with interviews, Duke?" Dad asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The market's competitive these days, but persistence usually pays off for people who really want to work. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Amanda jumped in with practiced ease, her voice carrying that syrupy sweetness she used when delivering her cruelest observations. "Duke's always been more of a dreamer than a doer," she explained to Marcus, who continued eating without comment. "Even in college, he had these grandiose plans that never quite worked out. I think he expects opportunities to just fall into his lap." "That's not exactly fair," I started. But Mom was already nodding in agreement with Amanda's assessment. "Your sister's right, honey. She worked hard to get where she is, networking, building relationships, making smart career moves. That's how success happens in the real world. Mom's voice carried the weight of years of comparison, countless conversations where my achievements were measured against Amanda's accomplishments, and found lacking. Marcus set down his fork and looked directly at me. "What kind of marketing work did you do before?" His question cut through the family narrative like a knife, demanding actual information instead of accepting their characterizations. "I worked for Patterson Creative, a mid-sized agency downtown. We handled campaigns for tech companies, retail brands, some healthcare clients." I found myself sitting straighter, grateful for someone asking about my actual experience instead of my failures. My specialty was strategic positioning and brand messaging. "What was your most successful campaign?" Marcus asked, and I noticed Amanda's slight frown at the direction of the conversation. "We launched a comprehensive rebranding effort for a cloud storage company called Zenith Technologies. The client wanted to pivot from B2B services to consumer market penetration. I developed the messaging strategy, oversaw creative direction, and managed the multi-platform rollout. The words came easier as I remembered the satisfaction of seeing that campaign succeed. We increased their consumer recognition by 30% in 6 months." Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Amanda was already interrupting. "Duke loves to oversell his contributions," she laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "I'm sure there was a whole team working on that project. He probably just handled some administrative tasks and now claims credit for the entire campaign." The familiar shame began creeping up my neck, that automatic response to Amanda's corrections that had been trained into me over decades. But Marcus was still watching me, his attention steady and focused in a way that felt different from my family's dismissive patience. "The Zenith campaign," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "That's interesting. Very interesting indeed." Amanda seemed to sense the conversation slipping away from her control, and her response was swift and brutal. She launched into what I recognized as her greatest hits collection, a carefully curated selection of my most embarrassing moments designed to establish the family hierarchy once and for all. "Since we're talking about Duke's accomplishments," she began with that razor-sharp smile, "maybe Marcus should hear about his complete track record, like how he changed majors 3 times in college because he couldn't handle the coursework, or how he got fired from his first job out of school for missing deadlines." "Amanda, that's enough," I said quietly, but she was just getting started. "Oh, but it gets better. Remember the girlfriend who broke up with him because he couldn't commit to basic relationship responsibilities? Or the apartment he lost because he spent his security deposit on some get-rich-quick scheme that failed within 2 months?" Amanda's voice grew more animated as she warmed to her subject, clearly enjoying Marcus's attention. Mom and Dad exchanged those familiar looks of parental resignation, the expressions that said they loved me but couldn't understand why I couldn't be more like my successful sister. "Duke's always been the sensitive one," Mom explained to Marcus with the tone she might use to describe a beloved but disappointing pet. "We keep hoping he'll find his direction, but patterns are hard to break." "The job he just lost," Dad added with his accountant's precision, "he was let go for incompetence. Not downsizing, not budget cuts, performance issues." He shook his head with practiced disappointment. At his age, a man should be building something, not bouncing from failure to failure. I felt the familiar weight of their judgment pressing down on me, that suffocating sensation of being trapped in a narrative I couldn't escape. "That's not what happened," I tried to explain. "Patterson Creative lost 3 major clients due to market conditions. They had to cut 30% of their staff, and last hired meant first fired. Duke, honey." Mom's voice carried that patient tone she used when explaining obvious truths to someone who refused to understand them. Companies don't let go of valuable employees during tough times. They keep their best people and trim the deadweight. If you'd been essential to their success, Amanda pounced on the opening like a predator sensing wounded prey. Exactly my point. Duke spent so many years making excuses for his failures that he actually believes them now. It's honestly kind of sad to watch. Throughout this systematic destruction of my character, Marcus remained silent, but I noticed his attention never wavered. He wasn't laughing along with my family's cruel entertainment or nodding in agreement with their assessments. Instead, he seemed to be studying the dynamics with the same intensity he might bring to analyzing a complex business problem. "The Zenith Technologies campaign," Marcus said suddenly, cutting through Amanda's monologue about my romantic failures. "You said you developed the messaging strategy for their consumer market pivot." "Yes," I replied, grateful for any escape from the character assassination taking place at our family dinner table. "What was your strategic approach? How did you position them against established competitors like Dropbox and Google Drive?" Marcus's questions were specific, technical, requiring detailed knowledge that couldn't be faked or exaggerated. I found myself leaning forward, energized by the opportunity to discuss actual work instead of my personal shortcomings. We identified a gap in the family sharing market. Most cloud storage services were designed for individual users or business applications, but families needed something different: shared photo albums, collaborative planning tools, secure document sharing for household management. "The emotional positioning?" Marcus prompted. "We called it Your Life, Connected." The campaign focused on life moments, family memories, the ways technology could strengthen relationships instead of complicating them. We used real families in the advertising, showed authentic interactions, avoided the sterile corporate feel that dominated the category. Marcus nodded slowly, and I noticed his expression had changed completely. The polite attention was replaced by something sharper, more focused. "What about the digital strategy? How did you reach your target demographic?" Amanda's patience finally snapped. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she interrupted with barely contained frustration. "Duke gets carried away with these stories and starts believing his own exaggerations. Marcus, you're just encouraging his delusions of grandeur." But Marcus ignored her completely, keeping his attention fixed on me. "The campaign metrics. Do you remember the performance indicators 6 months post-launch? 30% increase in consumer signups, 18% improvement in brand recognition among families with children, and a 42% boost in social media engagement." The numbers came easily because I had been proud of those results, had actually believed they might lead to career advancement before the layoffs hit. Marcus set down his wine glass with deliberate precision, and the sound seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet dining room. "That's remarkable accuracy for someone who supposedly just handled administrative tasks." Amanda's face flushed red, but before she could respond, Marcus continued speaking in that same measured tone. "I know those numbers because I was tracking them very closely. You see, my company was the client that commissioned that campaign." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Amanda's mouth opened and closed without sound, while my parents looked confused by the sudden shift in conversation. "TechFlow Solutions," Marcus said, watching my face carefully. "We hired Patterson Creative to reposition our cloud storage subsidiary, Zenith Technologies. I personally approved the strategic direction Duke just described, and I watched every metric he just quoted exceed our most optimistic projections. I felt like someone had just told me the sky was actually green. "You're the CEO of TechFlow?" "I am indeed," Marcus replied with that same faint smile I had noticed earlier. "And I've been wondering for the past 6 months why Duke Morrison never responded to our job offer." The revelation hit the dining room like a bomb, shattering the carefully constructed narrative that had governed our family dynamics for years. I stared at Marcus, trying to process what he had just said while my parents looked back and forth between us with growing confusion. "Job offer," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be email messages. "I sent 3 separate emails to your Patterson Creative address, offering you the position of Senior Marketing Director with TechFlow Solutions. Starting salary of $95,000, full benefits, stock options, and a team of 6 direct reports." He looked up from his phone with genuine puzzlement. "When you never responded, I assumed you weren't interested or had found something better." My world tilted on its axis. I had never received any job offers, had spent the past 6 months convinced that my work at Patterson Creative had been mediocre at best. I never got those emails. I would have responded immediately. "That position sounds incredible." "Duke," Marcus said seriously, Your strategic work on the Zenith campaign was exceptional. It directly led to our most successful product launch in company history. I've been using your messaging framework as the template for all our subsequent brand positioning efforts. Amanda, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly found her voice again. "This is obviously some kind of misunderstanding," she said with forced laughter. "Marcus, you're being very kind, but surely you can see that Duke is confused about his actual role in that campaign." Marcus turned to look at Amanda for the first time since dropping his bombshell, and his expression was carefully neutral. "You mentioned that you work in tech as well. What company?" Amanda straightened in her chair, clearly grateful to redirect attention back to her own accomplishments. "I'm Vice President of Operations at TechFlow Solutions. I've been there for almost 2 years now, managing cross-departmental efficiency initiatives and strategic workflow optimization." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus continued looking at Amanda with that same neutral expression, but I noticed a muscle in his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Vice President of Operations," he repeated slowly. "At TechFlow Solutions." "That's right," Amanda replied confidently. "I report directly to the executive team on operational metrics and process improvement initiatives. It's quite a demanding role, but I've been able to implement several cost-saving measures that have significantly improved our bottom line." My parents beamed with pride at their daughter's impressive corporate position, but I was watching Marcus's face and beginning to feel a growing sense of unease. "That's fascinating," Marcus said in a tone that could have been carved from ice. "Because I am the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, and our Vice President of Operations is a woman named Sarah Chen, who has been with the company for 5 years. I've never seen you before tonight, Amanda." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda's confident expression flickered like a candle in the wind, but she quickly rallied. "We must work in different divisions," she said with a nervous laugh. "TechFlow is such a large company, and I primarily work remotely. My immediate supervisor is probably someone you don't interact with regularly." Marcus shook his head slowly. TechFlow Solutions employs exactly 237 people across 4 divisions. The VP of Operations reports directly to me and attends our weekly executive meetings. There is no remote work option for executive-level positions, and I personally approve every hire above manager level. "Maybe I used a different name professionally," Amanda tried desperately. "Some women do that in corporate environments to avoid gender discrimination." "What's your employee ID number?" Marcus asked simply. Amanda's face went pale. "I don't have it memorized." "Who memorizes their employee ID?" "What's your corporate email address?" "I access it through a secure portal. I'd have to look it up." "What floor is your office on?" "I work from multiple locations depending on project needs." Marcus pulled out his phone again and began typing. "This is very interesting, because our IT security team has been tracking some unusual access patterns to our confidential client database. Someone has been using stolen credentials to download sensitive information over the past several months." My parents were looking back and forth between Marcus and Amanda, like spectators at a tennis match, their expressions shifting from confusion to growing alarm. I felt a sick sensation growing in my stomach as I began to understand what Marcus was suggesting. "The security logs show these unauthorized accesses originating from an IP address in the Riverside Park apartment complex on 3rd Street, Marcus continued, his voice remaining eerily calm. "Would you happen to live in that area, Amanda?" Amanda's face had gone completely white. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "This is ridiculous. You're obviously mistaken about something." Marcus's phone buzzed with what appeared to be a text message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. "Actually, I'm not mistaken about anything. The IP address traces to apartment 312 at Riverside Park Commons. The lease is in the name Amanda Morrison, and our security cameras caught footage of someone matching your description, entering our building multiple times, using a cloned access badge." The room spun around me as the pieces began falling into place. Amanda's expensive clothes, her luxury apartment, the lifestyle she maintained without any visible means of support. I had always assumed our parents were helping her financially, but now a much darker picture was emerging. "You've been stealing from them," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "You've been selling their client information." Amanda's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. Her shoulders sagged, and tears began streaming down her face as the weight of her deception became impossible to maintain. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "It started small, just some basic market research that competitors were willing to pay for. But then the bills kept piling up, and I needed more money to keep up appearances." Marcus was already dialing a number on his phone. "Security? This is Marcus Thompson. I need you to contact the police immediately. We've found our data thief." The next 20 minutes felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. As Marcus spoke quietly with his security team, Amanda's entire fabricated life crumbled around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Each revelation hit harder than the last, leaving our family reeling from the scope of her deception. "I want to understand the timeline," Marcus said after ending his call with security. His voice had taken on the authoritative tone of a CEO conducting a hostile takeover. "How long have you been impersonating a TechFlow employee?" Amanda wiped her eyes with her napkin, leaving streaks of mascara across the red fabric. 18 months, she admitted in a voice so quiet we had to strain to hear her. "It started when I lost my job at Peterson Marketing. I couldn't face telling everyone I was unemployed again, so I made up the story about TechFlow." "Peterson Marketing," I repeated, feeling another piece of the puzzle click into place. "That's where I sent my resume last year. They said they weren't hiring." Amanda's face crumpled further. "They called me for a reference check since I claimed we worked together at Patterson Creative. I told them you were unreliable, had attitude problems, couldn't work with clients." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own sister had sabotaged my job prospects while building her criminal enterprise on my former employer's reputation. "How many companies did you poison against me?" "I don't know," Amanda sobbed. "Maybe 6 or 7. I had to maintain the story that you were the failure and I was the success. It was the only way to explain why I was doing so well while you couldn't find work." Mom and Dad sat in stunned silence, their faces cycling through disbelief, horror, and dawning comprehension. The golden child they had praised and supported had been living a complete lie while systematically destroying her brother's career prospects. "The stolen data," Marcus continued relentlessly. "What exactly did you access and sell?" Amanda's confession came out in broken fragments between sobs. She had started by selling basic market research to competing companies, but the demand for more sensitive information had driven her to take increasingly dangerous risks. Client lists, strategic plans, proprietary technology specifications, merger discussions, personnel files containing salary information, and performance reviews. "The Hamilton Industries acquisition," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Did you sell information about that deal?" Amanda nodded miserably. "Zenith Corp offered me $50,000 for the preliminary negotiations documents. I needed the money for my lease renewal and car payments. That leak cost us a $200 million acquisition," Marcus said, each word precise and deadly. "Hamilton Industries pulled out of negotiations after their confidential information appeared in a Zenith Corp presentation. We lost 18 months of development work and had to lay off 43 employees." The human cost of Amanda's greed was staggering. Dozens of families had lost their income because she needed to maintain her expensive facade. I thought about those Patterson Creative employees who had been let go, wondering how many of their job losses could be traced back to the industrial espionage my sister had been conducting. "The job offer emails you sent to Duke," Mom said suddenly, her voice hollow with realization. "Did Amanda intercept those too?" Marcus nodded grimly. "The security investigation revealed that someone had been monitoring email communications between our executives and former Patterson Creative employees. Duke wasn't the only one who never received our recruitment offers." Amanda looked up with red, swollen eyes. "I set up email forwarding from his Patterson account after the layoffs. I told him it was to help watch for job opportunities, but I was really screening everything to make sure no one contacted him with good offers." The systematic nature of her sabotage was breathtaking. She hadn't just stolen from TechFlow. She had orchestrated my professional isolation to maintain her position as the family success story. Every job rejection, Every unanswered application, every month of mounting desperation, had been partially orchestrated by my own sister. The money, Dad asked weakly, where did it all go? Amanda's lifestyle had been entirely built on blood money. The luxury apartment with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, leased BMW with premium options, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, frequent weekend trips to Chicago and Nashville, lavish gifts for our parents. She had been living like a successful executive while systematically destroying the company that her fictional position claimed to serve. I thought I could pay it back, Amanda said desperately. I was looking for legitimate work, trying to find a way to return the money and come clean. But the payments kept getting bigger, and I couldn't afford to stop without losing everything. Marcus's phone rang, and he stepped into the kitchen to take the call. Through the doorway, we could hear him providing detailed information to what sounded like law enforcement officers. When he returned, his expression was grim. The FBI wants to interview you about the Hamilton Industries leak, he told Amanda, that crosses into federal corporate espionage territory. You're looking at potential prison time, not just civil penalties. Amanda collapsed forward onto the table, her body shaking with the magnitude of what she had done. Our parents sat frozen, unable to process the fact that their successful daughter was facing federal charges, while the son they had dismissed as a failure had been the victim of her crimes. Duke, Marcus said, turning to me with an expression of profound regret. I owe you a significant apology. Those recruitment emails should have reached you months ago. If we had conducted a proper investigation into the communication failures, we might have discovered this theft much sooner. I found myself in the surreal position of comforting the CEO, whose company my sister had been robbing. You couldn't have known. Amanda has always been good at managing information and controlling narratives. The doorbell rang, and through the front window, we could see the distinctive red and blue lights of police cars reflecting off the snow-covered street. Amanda's crimes were about to become a matter of public record, and our family's Christmas dinner was about to become evidence in a federal investigation. As the authorities entered our family home, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and my own worth had been built on lies. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else stirring in my chest. Hope. The arrest process was surreal and devastating. 2 FBI agents and a local detective entered our family home with professional courtesy but unmistakable authority. They read Amanda her rights in the same living room where she had spent the evening demolishing my character, and the irony was not lost on anyone present. Amanda Morrison, you're under arrest for corporate espionage, identity theft, wire fraud, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the lead agent announced as he placed handcuffs around my sister's wrists. The metallic click seemed to echo through the house, a sound that would haunt our family gatherings forever. Amanda sobbed as they led her to the police car, her expensive burgundy dress incongruous with the harsh reality of federal custody. Neighbors emerged from their own holiday celebrations to watch the spectacle, their Christmas lights twinkling cheerfully against the grim scene unfolding on our front lawn. Mom and Dad stood in the doorway like statues, unable to process the complete collapse of their understanding about their children. The daughter they had praised and supported was being loaded into a police car, while the son they had dismissed as worthless was being offered a $95,000 job by the very CEO she had been robbing. After the authorities departed with Amanda and their initial evidence collection, Marcus and I found ourselves alone with my shell-shocked parents in the suddenly quiet house. The Christmas tree lights continued their cheerful blinking, but the holiday magic had been thoroughly destroyed by the evening's revelations. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, Marcus said gently, I want you to know that Duke is completely innocent in this situation. In fact, he's been the victim of systematic sabotage by someone he trusted completely. Dad sank into his recliner, looking older than I had ever seen him. We've been so wrong about everything. All these years, we've been praising Amanda's success while criticizing Duke for failures that weren't even his fault. The signs were there, Mom said quietly, tears streaming down her face. Amanda never wanted us to visit her workplace, always made excuses when we suggested meeting her colleagues. She insisted on hosting every family gathering at restaurants instead of her apartment. We should have questioned how she could afford such an expensive lifestyle. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them the actual recruitment emails he had sent to me. Duke's work on the Zenith campaign was exceptional. When he never responded to our offers, I assumed he had found something better or wasn't interested in working with us. Now I understand that he never had the opportunity to see them. Reading those emails was like discovering an alternate universe where my professional life had taken a completely different trajectory. Senior marketing director, comprehensive benefits package, stock options, leadership opportunities, the chance to build something meaningful instead of scraping together freelance assignments to pay rent. The position is still available if you're interested, Marcus continued, addressing me directly. In fact, after tonight's events, I think we need someone with your integrity and strategic thinking, even more than we did 6 months ago. I found myself struggling to respond. 6 hours earlier, I had entered this house as the family failure, prepared for another evening of subtle humiliation and disappointed sighs. Now, I was being offered a dream job by a man who had witnessed firsthand how my own family treated me. "I'm interested," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. "More than interested. I just need some time to process everything that's happened tonight." Marcus nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. This has been traumatic for everyone involved. But Duke, I want you to know that your professional reputation is completely intact. In fact, after seeing how you handled yourself tonight under extremely difficult circumstances, I'm even more convinced that you're exactly what TechFlow Solutions needs." Over the next several hours, as we gave statements to investigators and began the process of understanding the scope of Amanda's crimes, a different picture of our family began to emerge. My parents gradually acknowledged the patterns of favoritism that had allowed Amanda's deception to flourish, while making my life unnecessarily difficult. "We always assumed success was measured by external appearances," Dad admitted, as we sat around the kitchen table drinking coffee at 2 in the morning. "Amanda drove a nice car, lived in an expensive apartment, wore designer clothes. It never occurred to us to ask hard questions about how she afforded that lifestyle. Meanwhile," Mom added tearfully, "we criticized Duke for living modestly and struggling to find steady work. We never considered that someone might be actively sabotaging his opportunities." The investigators revealed that Amanda's theft had been even more extensive than Marcus initially realized. She had sold information to 7 different competing companies, compromised 14 major client relationships, and potentially caused millions of dollars in lost revenue and development costs. The Hamilton Industries acquisition was just the tip of the iceberg. "She'll likely face 15 to 20 years in federal prison," the lead FBI agent explained. "Corporate espionage at this level is taken very seriously, especially when it involves multiple companies and international competitors." As dawn approached and the initial shock began wearing off, Marcus made me an offer that changed everything. "Duke, I know this has been an incredibly difficult night for your family. If you accept our position, I'd like to offer you a signing bonus to help cover any financial hardships you've experienced due to the employment sabotage." The signing bonus was more money than I had earned in the previous 6 months combined. Combined with the salary and benefits package, it represented not just employment, but genuine financial security for the first time in years. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, as he prepared to leave our house as the sun rose over Columbus. "The FBI investigation is going to be high profile. Amanda's case will likely make the local news as a significant corporate espionage story. I want you to be prepared for media attention." The irony was overwhelming. Amanda had always craved recognition and public acknowledgement of her success. Now she would receive exactly that attention, but as the central figure in a federal crime story rather than a business success narrative. As I stood in my parents' driveway watching Marcus drive away, I realized that this Christmas morning would mark the beginning of an entirely new chapter in my life. The family dynamics that had defined my identity for 28 years had been shattered, but from the wreckage, something healthier and more honest could finally grow. 6 months later, I stood in the executive conference room of TechFlow Solutions, presenting quarterly results to a room full of senior managers who actually listened to my ideas and valued my contributions. The transformation in my professional life had been remarkable, but the personal healing process for my family had been equally profound. Amanda was serving a reduced sentence of 8 years in federal prison after cooperating fully with authorities and helping them understand the scope of corporate espionage networks operating in the tech industry. Her testimony had led to investigations at 12 other companies and the arrest of 7 additional conspirators. The media attention Marcus had predicted materialized exactly as he described. Local woman, sentenced in multi-million-dollar corporate espionage case, had been front-page news in the Columbus Dispatch, complete with Amanda's professional headshot and details about her elaborate deception. The irony was not lost on anyone that she finally received the public recognition she had always craved, just not in the form she had imagined. My parents had undergone their own transformation during those 6 months. The revelation of their favoritism and its devastating consequences had forced them to confront patterns of behavior they had never questioned. Family therapy sessions had been painful but necessary, helping all of us understand how comparison and conditional love had poisoned our relationships. We spent 30 years teaching our children that love was based on achievement rather than character, Mom said during one particularly difficult session. Amanda learned that she needed to appear successful to earn our approval, while Duke learned that nothing he did would ever be good enough. The therapy revealed that Amanda's criminal behavior had roots in the impossible pressure to maintain her position as the family success story. When her legitimate career faltered, she chose deception and crime, rather than face the disappointment she knew would follow an honest admission of failure. "I created a monster," Dad admitted tearfully. "Every time I praised Amanda's accomplishments while criticizing Duke's struggles, I was teaching her that her worth as a person depended on outperforming her brother. My new position at TechFlow had exceeded every expectation. As Senior Marketing Director, I led a team of 6 talented professionals, managed relationships with major clients, and developed strategic campaigns that drove significant revenue growth. The Zenith Technologies framework I had created became the foundation for 3 additional successful product launches. Marcus had become not just my employer but a genuine mentor and friend. His leadership style emphasized collaboration, integrity, and long-term thinking rather than short-term appearances. Working for someone who valued character over credentials had been a revelation after years of rejection and disappointment. Duke's success isn't surprising, Marcus told the board of directors during my 6-month review. What's remarkable is that he maintained his integrity and work ethic despite years of systematic sabotage and family discouragement. That kind of resilience is exactly what we need in leadership positions. The financial transformation had been equally dramatic. The signing bonus had allowed me to move from my studio apartment to a comfortable 2-bedroom place with a dedicated home office. I purchased a reliable car to replace my aging Honda, built an emergency savings account, and even started contributing to a retirement fund for the first time in my adult life. But the most meaningful change had been in my relationship with my parents. The forced honesty that followed Amanda's arrest had created space for genuine connection rather than the superficial interactions that had characterized our family gatherings for decades. "We want to build something different with you," Mom said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Not based on your job title or salary, but on who you are as a person. We should have been doing that all along." Dad had been equally committed to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of respect rather than disappointment. "I spent so many years treating you like a business problem to be solved instead of a son to be loved. I can't undo that damage, but I can commit to doing better going forward." The most difficult aspect of the entire situation had been my relationship with Amanda herself. After 6 months of reflection and therapy, I had decided to visit her in the minimum security federal facility where she was serving her sentence. The visiting room was institutional and depressing, but Amanda looked healthier than she had in years. Prison had stripped away the expensive facade she had maintained for so long, revealing someone who seemed more genuine than the sister I had known for most of my life. "I destroyed everything," she said simply, as we sat across from each other at a small metal table. "My career, my freedom, your opportunities, our family relationships. I don't know how to begin making amends for that kind of damage. The therapy program here has helped me understand that I built my entire identity around being better than you," Amanda continued. "When my real career started failing, I chose crime rather than admitting I wasn't the success story I pretended to be. I had prepared for this conversation during months of counseling, but actually facing my sister in federal custody was still emotionally overwhelming. "I forgive you," I told her, surprised by how much I meant those words. Not because what you did wasn't devastating, but because holding on to anger would just create more damage. Amanda cried then, the first genuine tears I had seen from her since childhood. "I don't deserve forgiveness, especially from you. I systematically sabotaged your career because I couldn't bear the thought of you succeeding while I was failing. We were both victims of a family system that taught us to compete instead of supporting each other," I said. "I'm not excusing what you did, but I understand how we got here." The prison therapy program had given Amanda tools to understand her destructive patterns and develop healthier ways of relating to others. She was taking college courses, participating in job training programs, and working with a counselor to develop realistic plans for rebuilding her life after release. "I'll have a felony record and no legitimate work experience for the past 2 years, Amanda said. "Starting over at 32 with that kind of background isn't going to be easy. You'll have family support this time," I promised. "Real support, not the conditional approval we grew up with." The visit ended with tentative plans for regular communication and a commitment to rebuilding our relationship based on honesty rather than competition. Amanda would serve 6 more years, but she would emerge to a family that had learned to value character over achievement. As I drove home from the prison, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that Christmas dinner. The brother who had been dismissed as a failure was now leading successful marketing campaigns and earning genuine respect from his colleagues. The sister who had been praised as a success was serving federal time for corporate espionage. But the most important transformation had been in our family's understanding of what really mattered. Success without integrity was ultimately worthless, while character and resilience could overcome almost any setback. 2 years after that life-changing Christmas dinner, I stood before 300 TechFlow Solutions employees at our annual company meeting, delivering the keynote presentation about strategic marketing innovation. The applause that followed my talk was genuine and enthusiastic, a far cry from the dismissive responses my ideas had received at family gatherings throughout my 20s. Marcus introduced me to the audience as his successor for the Chief Marketing Officer position, a promotion that would make me the youngest executive in company history. The journey from unemployed freelancer to C-suite executive in less than 3 years felt surreal, but it had been built on foundation of hard work, integrity, and the support of people who valued substance over appearances. My parents sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride that felt entirely different from their previous favoritism toward Amanda. This approval was based on who I had become as a person, not just what I had achieved professionally. The family therapy had taught all of us to separate love from performance, creating space for genuine relationships rather than competitive dynamics. Amanda was scheduled for release in 4 years, and our weekly phone conversations had revealed someone completely transformed from the desperate, competitive person who had sabotaged my career. Prison education programs had given her accounting skills and a realistic understanding of how to rebuild a life based on honest work rather than criminal shortcuts. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," she told me during our most recent call. "But more importantly, I'm proud of how you've handled success. You could have become bitter and vindictive after what I did to you, but instead you chose forgiveness and healing." The ripple effects of that Christmas evening had extended far beyond our immediate family. The FBI investigation Amanda had cooperated with led to the arrest and conviction of 17 people involved in corporate espionage networks across 6 states. The security improvements implemented at TechFlow Solutions had been adopted by dozens of other companies, creating industry-wide protections against similar theft. Marcus had been promoted to Chief Executive Officer of TechFlow's parent company, partly based on his handling of the espionage crisis and the subsequent security overhaul. His leadership during that difficult period had demonstrated the kind of principled decision-making that boards of directors valued in uncertain times. "Your family situation taught me something important about leadership," Marcus told me during my promotion celebration. "Sometimes the most valuable employees are the ones who have faced adversity with grace, rather than those who have never been tested." The financial transformation in my life had been substantial, but not excessive. The CMO salary allowed me to purchase a modest house in a good neighborhood, contribute meaningfully to retirement savings, and help support Amanda's educational expenses during her incarceration. But more importantly, financial security had given me the confidence to make decisions based on values rather than desperation. My dating life had also improved dramatically once I stopped approaching relationships from a position of shame and insecurity. Meeting Sarah at a professional conference had led to a healthy partnership with someone who valued my character and integrity rather than my job title or bank account. We were planning to marry the following spring, and Amanda would be able to participate in the ceremony via video call from the federal facility. The most profound change had been in my understanding of success itself. Growing up, I had internalized my family's definition of achievement as external validation, material possessions, and superiority over others. Prison and therapy had taught Amanda that this approach led inevitably to emptiness and self-destruction. Real success is being able to sleep peacefully, knowing that your accomplishments came through honest work and didn't require harming other people, I had learned to tell myself during difficult moments. Everything else is just keeping score in a game that doesn't actually matter. The Christmas dinner that had seemed like my lowest moment had actually been the catalyst for the most important growth in my adult life. Amanda's cruel introduction of me, as the failure of our family, had inadvertently created the conditions for Marcus to discover both her crimes and my sabotaged potential. Standing in my new executive office 2 years later, looking out at the Columbus skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, I often thought about the unpredictability of life's turning points. A single evening had simultaneously destroyed one person's criminal enterprise and launched another person's legitimate career, simply because truth had finally emerged from years of carefully maintained deception. The life lesson that emerged from our family's crisis was both simple and profound. Authentic success requires authentic effort, authentic relationships demand authentic honesty, and authentic happiness comes from authentic self-acceptance rather than comparison with others. Amanda's rehabilitation in prison had taught her that she was valuable as a person regardless of her achievements or failures. My professional success had taught me that competence and character would eventually be recognized by the right people, even if it took longer than expected. Our parents had learned that conditional love created children who either became desperate people-pleasers or rebellious self-destructors, while unconditional love created adults who could take healthy risks and recover gracefully from inevitable setbacks. The company culture at TechFlow Solutions had also evolved based on lessons learned from the espionage crisis. Marcus implemented mentorship programs, transparent communication policies, and advancement opportunities based on merit rather than politics. The workplace became a model for how organizations could create success through collaboration rather than internal competition. As I prepared for my new role as Chief Marketing Officer, I often reflected on how different my life might have been if Amanda's crimes had never been discovered. I would probably still be struggling with freelance work, wondering why my career had stalled while accepting my family's assessment of my limitations. Instead, I had learned that my worth as a person was independent of my professional achievements, that honest work created lasting satisfaction in ways that shortcuts never could, and that forgiveness was ultimately more powerful than revenge in creating the kind of life worth living. The Christmas dinner that began with humiliation had ended with justice, redemption, and hope for everyone involved, not because of any miracle or unlikely coincidence, but because truth has a way of emerging when people are finally ready to face it honestly. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything you believed about yourself or your family turned out to be based on lies or misunderstandings? How did you find the strength to rebuild your relationships and your self-worth after discovering such painful truths? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember that sometimes our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest growth. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it when they need encouragement about overcoming family dysfunction or workplace betrayal. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through adversity and building authentic success through honest effort. And please, share this with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or sabotage. Thank you for listening to this journey of family healing and personal redemption. Remember that truth always has more power than deception, Character matters more than appearances, and forgiveness can set both the forgiven and the forgiver free to build better lives. Until next time, may your own story be filled with honest relationships, meaningful work, and the peace that comes from living authentically.